This is Mark Seeley and Lee Frelich. We're here today to address some of the questions that were presented following the recent Forest Values and Carbon Markets Conference up at Cloquet, Minnesota. And so we've chosen to do this via video. And so what we'd like to do is tackle some of these questions and give you our answers in this form. The first question before us is it possible with concerted international effort to reverse trends and get CO2 emissions back to a safe level? My take on that is that it is indeed possible to mitigate CO2 emissions, and that this would indeed have some effect given that the human contribution in terms of CO2 sources in the Earth's atmosphere is a significant one. So we could take action to mitigate this, but I guess I'm not prepared knowledge-wise to make a definitive statement about what level might be safe. But indeed, the pace or rate of change is remarkably large, and we could mitigate that if we take appropriate action.
I think we should try to get to Jim Hansen's stated level of 350 parts per million, whereas we're sitting at 385 or 390 right now and going up rapidly. So we at least need to reverse or stop the rise and preferably reverse a little bit and go back to a somewhat lower CO2 level than we have now. I think it is possible. I don't think we will. The next question is about birch on the North Shore. There's been a lot of dieback of paper birch. And what about the range of latitudes over which birch grows? Well, the birch on the North Shore have been suffering from 5 years of drought and warmer than normal soil temperatures. When you have dry summers, the soils warm up more. Also, we have the European earthworm invasion up there. They're eating the duff layer, which would normally insulate the soil during the summer, and that's making the soils get warmer too. And we're in a little bit of a warmer climate than we were last time there was a major drought, so I'm not surprised there's a lot of birch dying back. There's birch stands of all ages dying on south-facing slopes. I've seen them 20 years old dying and 100 years old, whereas on north-facing slopes there's some 100-plus-year-old stands that are still doing okay, and that tells me that it's really the warm, dry summers we've had in recent years that's killing the birch, and that's why the ones on the north slope are doing fine. Now, as far as birch goes, you can find it in southeastern Minnesota and even a little bit into northern Iowa, but that might be a different ecotype. A lot of trees have different, what we call ecotypes, where they're adapted to different climates in different parts of their range. I'm not sure that a birch from northern Minnesota would survive if you transplanted it to southeastern Minnesota. It'd die from the heat right away. Whereas those birch down there may be adapted to a little bit warmer climate, and maybe they can migrate north in the future in a warmer climate and inhabit the North Shore.
I guess the only thing I would add to what Lee's just provided is that although we may in the future see individual summers that are wetter and cooler, I fully expect that the background trend that Lee refers to in terms of dryness and warmer conditions will be prevalent in the long run. So I don't see that abating at all. Oh, okay. The next question refers to the current warm period, and does it date from the mini ice age of the mid-19th century, or was the climate stable and relatively not warming until a much later date, like the 1980s? The reality is that it depends on what scale you look at. If you look at the temperature records on a large geographic scale, for example, on a continental scale like North America, or on a hemispheric scale like the Northern Hemisphere, what you would find in the temperature evidence is that indeed you can track this warming period on the large scale back to about the mid-19th century. Now, there's been some changes in pace of that. There was a leveling out, or what we call the benign climate period, around the mid-20th century, but for the most part, it has been one of continuous warmth, more accelerated in recent decades than what we see back over the entire 150 or 160 years. So I hope that addresses it, that there has been some variability, but that the background pattern has been one of warmth since the end of the Little Ice Age around 1850.
Okay, the fourth question we have is, what are some of the changes in species composition in Minnesota forests that have already occurred? And that's a pretty complex picture. We have more things like balsam fir today because of fire exclusion. And in a warming climate, you would actually expect a boreal species like balsam fir to be contracting. It's actually expanding because it was limited both by fire and by warm climate. On the other hand, we have a lot of species that have the very northern edge of their range in Minnesota. Red oak, bur oak, yellow birch, basswood, sugar maple. We have quite a few trees that have the northern edge of their range, and we are observing expansion in those species at the northern edge of their range, and that's consistent with a warmer climate. For example, red maple is expanding very rapidly in the Boundary Waters canoe area, invading boreal forests that really didn't have much red maple according to the paleoecological record for the last several thousand years. And oak is expanding up there as well. So these species adapted to a warmer climate have begun their expansion. They're just at the very early phases of it. I expect to see much bigger expansions in the coming decades than we've seen so far.
And that's our response to the questions to those who attended the conference. We hope this video is helpful. We hope it'll enhance your continued dialogue on this important issue. And we'll look forward to responding to future questions and attending future conferences dealing with this important issue of our time. Thank you.